In the little tent was his assistant and driver, Private First Class Patrick J. Schuler, a young guy from Cincinnati. All around them, as the 3rd Battalion bedded down in a cornfield, were clues that foretold the disaster about to overtake them. With the North Koreans on the run, the 8th Cavalry's distant commanders, in Seoul and in Japan, all seemed to think the war was as good as won. Some of the men had been told to pack their belongings and get ready for a victory parade in Tokyo. The generals insisted that the Chinese would not enter the war. The generals were wrong. Lieutenant Bob Wood went into the hills on patrol and listened to enemy officers talking to one another on his radio. When he asked a South Korean what the enemy was saying, the Korean said, "Chinese." Herb Miller, a tough little sergeant who had fought in World War II, had taken a patrol north and come back with a farmer who told 3rd Battalion intelligence officers that the surrounding mountains hid tens of thousands of Chinese. The intelligence officers scoffed. Miller, disgusted, watched the farmer go home, then stuffed his pockets with grenades. Early on November 2nd, All Souls Day, Miller took out another patrol to the top of a little rise and bedded down in the dark. By then, although he didn't know it, the 1st and 2nd Battalions were already being overrun. The 3rd Battalion was next. After midnight, he heard a whistle downslope that sounded like a bird call. Miller punched the GI sleeping next to him. "That's no bird call," he said. "We are in for it." They got out of there and headed back to the battalion. But then they saw hundreds of figures moving in the dark, and a bugle blew, and then another, accompanied by the ghostly calls of sheep horns blown by Chinese peasant soldiers. Then machine guns sprayed pink tracer bullets, and mortars began thumping. Wild music broke out in the night, war songs from bugles in thousands of throats. Kapaun and Schuler had scrambled out of their tent long before this. Word had come that 1st and 2nd Battalions had already folded and were on the road headed for the rear. GIs fired flares into the night sky and caught their breath. They saw thousands of Chinese soldiers coming at them. A 19-year-old corporal named Bob McGreevy, dropping mortar shells down a tube, saw a forward observer come running. "Get the hell out of here," he yelled. 20,000 Chinese, who the generals said were not in North Korea, had rushed out of the hills at the 3,000 men of the 8th Cavalry.